This is the reading passage for week 2 of Activate. At the beginning of the passage, it gives you a little background information to sort of set the stage for what journalists should do or should not do as they try to report on news stories. So because this is so small and a little bit difficult to read, I'm going to read it aloud to you first. A fair-minded reader of our news coverage should not be able to discern the private opinions of those who contributed to that coverage, or to infer that we are promoting any agenda. A crucial goal of our news and feature reporting, apart from editorials, columns, criticism, and other content that is expressly opinionated, is to be non-ideological. Our stories may often make a point, but that point should be based on our reporting, not on our predetermined point of view. It may be difficult to fulfill our commitment to fairness. We must recognize our own biases and stand apart from them. We must also examine the ideological environment in which we work, for the biases of our sources, our colleagues, and our communities can distort our objectivity. Investigative reporting requires special diligence with respect to fairness. Those involved in such stories should bear in mind that they are more credible when they provide a rich, nuanced account of the topic. Our coverage should avoid simplistic portrayals. Keep in mind that there is always more than one viewpoint. People or groups that are under attack may refuse to discuss their views, but we should make every effort, and document those efforts, to get that side of the story, even if a refusal is a foregone conclusion. If the subject denies an allegation, that denial should appear in the published article. People who will be shown in an adverse light in an article must be given a meaningful opportunity to defend themselves. This means making a good faith effort to give the subject of allegations or criticism sufficient time and information to respond substantively. Whenever possible, the reporter should meet face to face with the subject in a sincere effort to understand his or her best arguments. When contacting a subject or a source, reporters and editors should routinely identify themselves and their news organization and state the purpose of their call. Exceptions to this policy should be approved by a senior editor. When interviewing subjects or sources, note-taking is essential. The better the notes, the easier it is to write the story. Many sources welcome the use of a recording device, which can be a valuable aid in verifying facts and quotes. It is impractical, however, to rely on a recorder alone, since transcription is time-consuming and recorders can malfunction. A combination of notes and a recorder is usually best. Given the complexity of laws covering the recording of conversations, the legal department should be consulted if there is any uncertainty about its legality. In a majority of states, including New York and the District of Columbia, it is lawful to record a telephone conversation with the consent of only one party to the call, in this instance, the journalist. But in other states, including California, recording a telephone conversation without consent of all parties is illegal and could subject the person recording the conversation to prosecution. Federal and state laws prohibit the undisclosed recording of telephone calls to which the journalist is not a party. Reporters and editors should make every effort to authenticate any documents provided by sources in the course of reporting a story. Reporters and photographers who wish to enter a private property should not trespass. If a journalist pursuing a story is on private property and is ordered by the owner or owner's agent to leave, the journalist should leave. Even a place of public accommodation, such as a restaurant, may be subject to restrictions imposed by owners. We are committed to informing readers as completely as possible. We want to make our reporting as transparent as possible so that our readers may know how and where we got our information. We should use anonymous sources only when we cannot otherwise provide information we consider reliable and newsworthy. Reporters should make every effort to gather information and conduct interviews that are on the record. When we use an unnamed source, we risk undermining the credibility of the information we are providing. We must be certain in our own minds that the benefit to readers is worth the cost in credibility. These standards are not intended to discourage reporters from cultivating sources who are wary of publicity. Such informants can be invaluable, but the information they provide can often be verified with sources willing to be named, from documents or both. We should make every effort to obtain such verification. We should not use such sources to publish material that is trivial, obvious, or self-serving. We should avoid blind quotation whose only purpose is to add color to a story. We should not use pseudonyms without telling the reader why we have done so. We must not mislead readers about the identities of people who appear in our stories. Sources should never be permitted to use the shield of anonymity to voice speculation. Editors have an obligation to know the identity of unnamed sources used in a story, so that editors and reporters can jointly assess the appropriateness of using them. The source for anything that appears in the paper will be known to at least one editor. That source must understand this rule. If the source refuses to accept this rule, the reporter should refuse to accept information from the source. In the case of exceptionally sensitive reporting, the reporter may request that the source's identity be given solely to the editor-in-chief. In any case, the editor to whom the information is provided must be in a position to evaluate the credibility of the source, and must be prepared to protect the source's identity. An unnamed source should have a compelling reason for insisting on anonymity. Readers and viewers should know why we have decided to grant anonymity to a source. The reporter and editor must be satisfied that the source has found a factual basis for his or her assertions. We should recognize that some sources quoted anonymously might tend to exaggerate or overreach precisely because they will not be named. So in this passage, they do use some jargon that relates to this field, such as source. They mean a person that you interview trying to get information. They also talk about some legal things, as far as recording conversations or being on property in certain places while they report. So overall, the basic idea is that reporting has to be fair. It has to be from both sides of the issue, and that journalists should do their best to choose to speak with people and interview people who are as honest as they can possibly be, or at least that the reporter can determine. So in your questions, if you look at question 1, it says the main concern of the author throughout the passage is that journalists, and overall, looking at the whole passage, the best answer is C, practice their craft according to a specific code of conduct. And code of conduct means how you behave yourself, that you have high expectations about the quality of the work that you do and that it's fair. So C is the best answer. Question 2 says, the author uses the word non-ideological, line 8, and if you go back and read that whole sentence there for context, it helps. Non-ideological to describe, and the answer there is J, a neutral point of view in which newspaper stories should be written. The idea is that these things should not be opinionated. The word non-ideological means basically no idea beforehand, or not preferring one idea over another idea, or one side of the story over another side of the story. Question 3 says, by saying investigative reporting requires special diligence, in lines 18 and 19 over here. And again, I would recommend that you read those lines and maybe that whole short paragraph there again before you answer. The answer that you want to choose is C, obliges journalists to present their readers with all sides of the matter or issue being investigated. So those lines talk about fairness, making sure that you have a rich account of the topic, meaning lots and lots of details, not just really shallow on one side. It says avoid simplistic portrayals. So that's why C is the best answer for number 3. Number 4 says the main function of the 5th paragraph, lines 70 to 80, in relation to the passage as a whole, is to, and the best answer there is, well, you could have narrowed it down to B and C. B says emphasize the point that journalists should follow established protocols in practicing their craft, which that again kind of goes back to specific code of conduct in question number 1. You might also have said something about D, reiterate a previous claim that journalists have a moral obligation to behave as law-abiding citizens. And it is talking about law in that passage about, not being on private property if somebody doesn't want you to be there, not trespassing and things like that. But the question asks about how this sort of relates, overall with the special diligence angle. So the better answer is B, because that fits better with the overall part of the article. Okay, question 5. It may be inferred from the first two sentences of the fourth paragraph, lines 41 through 45 here, that the author of the passage most likely believes that, and the answer you want to choose here, if you reread through that, is C. To get a story, journalists should be given the freedom to occasionally lie, conceal information, or engage in other deceptive practices. So, I don't think that's right. Okay. Maybe I read the question wrong here. I think what they're saying is that a lot of times reporters have to let folks know that they are objective, meaning that they aren't going to be subject to opinion. And sometimes when people get a phone call and they're talking to a reporter, they feel like maybe the reporter already has a predetermined idea and that prejudice might affect how they answer. So basically, the idea here is that journalists should be open and above board with their perspective, subjects, and sources. That second line there, that second sentence, kind of gives the idea that sometimes honesty is not always possible. So this idea about sometimes there are exceptions, but those are going to have to be approved by an editor. So that's sort of why C is the best answer there.